there was a poem, it was something that was, somebody had taken trouble in the past to write, to communicate something, and it was absolutely unique. If it hadn't existed, you couldn't have invented it any more than you could have thought of your closest friend if you'd never met that friend.
Yeah.
And it was also embodied in the very words that it was in. If you paraphrased it, it just became a handful of dust. And it was utterly implicit. You know, as soon as you made it explicit, you ruined it.
Yeah.
And then what did you do with it? You got a lot of clever people together in a seminar room, and you turned this unique, embodied, implicit thing into something general, abstract, and explicit. The left hemisphere fails to understand implicit meaning. It doesn't understand metaphor, jokes, irony, sense of humor. It takes things very literally, in a sort of mechanical way. It is less in touch with the body than the right hemisphere. And literally the body image, which is not just a visual image, but an image in all senses in the brain of ourselves as embodied beings, is in the right hemisphere. And he was saying also that the general ideas, as it were, get collected abstractly in the left hemisphere, but unique instances, embodied concrete instances of things, are better appreciated by the right hemisphere.
Yeah.
It's the left hemisphere that does the talking. It's my left hemisphere now that is speaking to you.
Yeah.
And it has set up a kind of language that works well for it. But it's much harder to convey the meanings and knowledge that the right hemisphere has.
Yeah.
That often, when you make something explicit, you utterly change its nature. You can see this with sex. You can see it with religion. You can see it with jokes. You can see it with poems. You know, and that when you disembody something, you utterly change its reality for us and how we relate to it.
Yeah.
And that when you abstract and generalize something, you've completely lost what was unique and special about it.
Yeah.
And you're doing a rather paradoxical thing, is you're destroying the thing that you're trying to examine in the process of examining.
Yeah.
Now the implicit is enormous compared with the explicit. The bit that we actually see explicitly in the center of our focus of consciousness is minute. Well, what I need to do is raise consciousness, and that's what I can't myself do very much. I'm a single person nearing the end of his life. So I don't claim and can't to, have solutions.
Yeah.
But what I can do is to open people's eyes to what's going on and how they're actually being deceived into. They're being palmed off really with a very, very sad, dwarfed, impoverished version of life, of the world, compared with one we could have and that people in other cultures possibly still do. It's always about getting this balance between the right and left, right? And when I say balance, they need to work together, but the right hemisphere needs to be the one that, as it were, oversees the picture.
Yeah.
Because literally it sees the bigger picture.
Yes.
Literally, the left hemisphere has a narrow beam focus of attention. It's like a high-resolution lens that is looking around and picking up details, and then wondering, how do I put all that together?
Yeah.
Whereas the right hemisphere, literally, its attention is broad and sustained over time.
Yeah.
And it so therefore sees a bigger picture. It also actually is, interestingly, quite clearly more intelligent.
Yeah.
So, there's been some very interesting research done recently on what happens to people after damage to parts of the brain in terms of their IQ.
Yeah.
And a lot of people might assume, well, the left hemisphere, it may have its problems, but it does all that sort of number crunching. Actually, a lot of the intelligent part of maths is to do with seeing analogies with pattern recognition, and goes on in the right hemisphere. And actually I'm writing about that at the moment. I mean, most great mathematicians and scientists, indeed, when describing their discoveries, don't describe a linear process.
Yeah.
They describe an insight, which then Einstein being another example.
It sounds very similar to music when you're describing that to me as well. The mathematics of tone or the mathematics of sequences of notes.
Yes.
It sounds like a very similar idea where, the great mathematicians see things as, the beauty in the patterns rather than the numbers themselves and the complexity of the math.
And beauty is a good word because, in fact, extraordinarily frequently scientists, highly imaginative scientists, I'm not talking about just everyone who works in a lab, but the people who've made the great breakthroughs, a lot of them physicists and mathematicians, consistently describe beauty as one of the guides to what it is that they're finding.
Yeah.
You might think that intelligence is largely dependent on this slightly boring accountant, as it were, the left hemisphere.
Yeah.
But it isn't. When people have strokes and damage to the brain, they got a series of 126 people who'd had a measurable drop in IQ following a brain injury or stroke. And extraordinarily, almost all, when you overlap them, almost all the areas of interest, in fact, 96% are in the right hemisphere.